we've actually defined an area of additional mandatory regulation. Then we also have laws which are voluntarily subscribed by a person who wishes the blockchain platform itself or the smart contract technology to be certified. If you follow a process, you can get a certification based on the quality of the technology. And the government has created an authority to do that.
And what would you say is a strategic approach to the regulation of the blockchain sector?
Yes, well, we all know that if you regulate too much, you're going to kill people from trying things out and developing solutions. So where it came to the technology, the government didn't want to impose regulation because there's no need for protection of investors or consumers until you get to the coin offerings which are relevant. If they are not relevant coin offerings, then you're fine. So the idea of this voluntary methodology where a person would subscribe to principles of regulation such as transparency, such as qualitative tests of the technology, such as, for instance, difficult issues like having the ability to intervene in the technology, very, very controversial issue, as to whether you give the power of intervention or the power of variation if there is a breach of law or loss which is being caused because of a defect. So these are the kind of issues which we put into the voluntary part, and that will then give you a qualitative assessment. So, the strategy is to encourage people to move to a standard rather than imposing a standard.
And why regulate DLTs and smart contracts at all under Maltese law?
Sorry?
Why regulate distributed ledger technology and smart contracts at all?
Yeah, well, the big issue was, do you regulate technology? And there's a mantra going around among many people is that you have to be technology neutral in your laws. And I've heard this thousands of times because I was actually involved in the development of the regulation. My view, which I haven't changed notwithstanding all the arguments, is that because this technology is now capable of automation, then there is a basis for regulating it. And therefore the answer to that question is because of the potential of automation and the fact that we are actually seeing it having direct impact on individuals, being investors or consumers, then it is necessary to come in at some level of protection.
Perfect. Let me kick it over actually to Joseph. Could you actually describe would you give us your opinion as to whether Malta should create a specific tax regime for VFA or not?
Okay, so although Malta has done a very good job in regulating the ecosphere from a licensing point of view, voluntary, mandatory licensing, regulatory regimes, there's still a lot of uncertainty and questions being asked on the tax treatment of these new products. So if I'm doing an ICO, if I'm creating an ICO, and I'm raising 10, 20, 30 million, are those funds taxable? If so, is taxation to crystallize at the point of the ICO or at a later date? And unfortunately, our tax authorities have up till now shied away from giving a clear opinion. What we're doing at the moment is sort of applying traditional accounting rules through IFRSs, particularly for utility tokens. We seem to be shifting as a whole industry towards a deferral, whereby at ICO stage, when there isn't token generation, the actual product available for consumption, there is no tax event. But then subsequently, should one move ahead and actually develop that particular product, software, and have users on that software, at that point in time you need to start shifting that deferred revenue into actual revenue and bring it back. To answer your question from whether we need to regulate or not, one also needs to also look at the traditional investor dealer. Should an investor which is selling tokens, coins, be taxable on the particular transaction? And in this case, I don't believe we need any new rules, because we have the traditional badges of trade, which, in my opinion, provide a sufficient enough guidance. So if you have a capital transaction, you would look at indicators which show that you're not trading, but you're just holding onto a particular token until you're in profit, and decide to crystallize that event, which in the case of Malta is exempt from tax, is outside the scope of tax, and the day traders, which on each single transaction they are liable to tax like any individual which is providing a service or another good.
And what about VAT? Do you think VAT needs new and additional regulations? Does that fit into the old framework? Is that covered by that?
Definitely. VAT is a completely different story when it comes to VAT. Malta isn't obviously in a position to regulate and give guidance as much as it could potentially do, for the simple reason that whatever Malta decides to implement from that point of view needs to be in line with the 6th VAT Directive, Council Directive 2006/112, and one needs therefore to be extremely careful in being the entity, the jurisdiction which came up with the VAT treatment, which could potentially end up being incorrect. In this case, one needs to be extremely careful to not running into the risk that Malta would consider a particular issue of a token, for example, to be subject to VAT in Malta, and that same issue, which is subscribed by an Italian individual, would be subject to VAT in Italy, where you would end up both countries requesting a VAT payment on that transaction. What the industry again seems to be moving on a whole European level, is towards the distinction between the different tokens. In the case of utility tokens, which probably are the most controversial, there is this analogy. It's not a perfect fit, but I would say it's close to it, with multi-purpose voucher. When I'm subscribing to utility token, in reality I'm purchasing a voucher which can be used in the future to purchase a good or a service. At that point in time, when I purchase that voucher, it's not possible to identify the correct VAT treatment, so one would again use the deferral treatment, whereby there will be a deferral to the point in time where that voucher is exchanged at the shopping mall on the platform against the actual goods or services, and that it will be at that point in time that the transaction will become subject to VAT or exempt, and depending on if it's taxable or not, one would establish the correct VAT treatment and the jurisdiction where the place of supply is deemed to take place.
Thanks so much. So if you just came back from lunch, we're talking about the legal issues that blockchain and cryptocurrency companies are facing in various jurisdictions. We're covering Malta right now, and we started with some general legal regulatory framework. We've talked about the tax laws, and then if you want to open a bank account in Malta, or if you're looking into how some of the banking laws might apply, I want to kick it over to Arthur, who may talk about some of the recent developments that have happened in Malta, especially with regard to some Maltese banks.
Thank you very much. If we spoke about Malta and Maltese regulation, we have to as well think about the banking system and the stability of banking system. 2 days ago we got a message that case of SETA Bank will not affect Maltese economy at all. It is official statement done by the Maltese government. I would like to tell you Maltese government one thing: it will affect. Why? Because maybe in SETA Bank there were just a few Maltese clients, but for international client it was the bank which was the most friendly bank for international clients. So if Malta would like to build the image of a trustful jurisdiction, it cannot be happening. We've got many clients right now with frozen accounts, many international clients who are creating here the job places, who are paying taxes here. And right now, you know what is their decision. Just at the moment when everything is going to be solved, they want to leave the island. It's except it's something which is not related to the blockchain technology or cryptocurrencies accepting, because this is the other thing which probably we'll discuss later on about what to do and how to deal with the banks for crypto companies. But yes, this short comment about the SETA bank, it is something what is unacceptable for the country which want to have image of stable economy.
And you're also an expert on Estonian law. Could you give us some background on what licensing issues blockchain businesses might face in Estonia?
I mean, the key difference between Estonia and other jurisdictions is that, I'm not sure if you know, but Estonia is based on e-administration. The whole administration in Estonia is decentralized and is based on blockchain technology. So people are telling that Estonia is the most digitalized country in the world. Actually, in fact, this is true, because you can run your company online, you can maintain all the reports online, you can communicate with the government online. Imagine the situation. I'm from Poland. I'm not used to this kind of solution, actually, to be honest. But if we would send a question by email to the government email, for example, info@ministryoffinance.gov.ee, they are obligated to answer us in 5 working days. And you know what? Knowing my experience in Poland, they will be finding that email for 5 months in Poland, and then finding anybody who will be able to answer that email for another 5 months. In Estonia, of course, we're speaking about a very small country, but in fact they do it. And once they reply you, it's usually the next day you receive information who's taking care of your request, and the answer which you get, it is usually takes another 2 or 3 days. And what is the most important thing, this is the official state of the government. So if I have for example, tax issue, what is sometimes quite important to have it in a short time, if I receive it, it's valid for me, it works, it's enforced. Speaking about the license, in Estonia, at the moment there are 2 kinds of license which are enforced since over a year. First kind of license is a license for exchange platform. It is a license which allows entities to maintain the business in exchanging crypto to fiat, fiat to crypto, and crypto to crypto. This is the first license. The second license is providing virtual wallet services. So if we would like to have this kind of activity, we can go under this license process. Usually it takes 30 days to get this license. The average cost of this license with the legal fees shouldn't exceed 5,000 euros for both license. So in this case, those licenses are granted first very fast. Then the cost is reasonable. Of course, if you're applying for such a license, you need to prepare the AML, KYC, anti-sanctions policy, and the whole structure of the company. But in case of Estonia, it is small nation, digital nation, so everything what we're doing later and all the reporting is done online. We do not receive even a single paper there.
And how about for ICOs? Can you give us a canvas of the different ICO regulations in Estonia?
I mean, the Estonian government recognized 2 kinds of ICOs. First, utility tokens, and the second part, whole part, is are the assets tokens. If you are issuing ICO and you're issuing just utility tokens, you don't need any special license and you don't need any special permissions. You just need to go through your AML KYC rules as a standard company. If you are dealing with security token, you need to have a permission from the like a normal permission for emitting bonds, and you need to use other ways.
Perfect. So now we have Malta and Estonia, and I'd like to bounce it over to the U.S. now. And Gordon, if you could take us through some of the regulations that a blockchain company face in the U.S., that would be great.
So I wish I could be up here on many of them, but it's a very, very challenging jurisdiction right now. There's several reasons why it's challenging. There's sort of the unique United States situation where we have 50 states, which are like little independent countries, and you face usually two levels of regulation in the United States. You face the federal level, which is the national level, and sometimes you face the state level. So depending on what you're selling and what you're doing, you may have to comply with the laws on the federal and national level, and then also with the laws of every single state within which you're doing business. So this can get a little rough. An example of this would be the money transmitter law. Every state, except for I think Montana, has its own money transmitter law. And then you also have to deal with the federal level, which is FinCEN and a whole bunch of other things. So it gets a little bit rough. When it comes to issuing tokens or doing an ICO, if you're selling a security token, it's pretty clear that you either need to register or qualify that sale with the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission. That's the federal agency. There's an active controversy right now in the U.S. about whether or not utility tokens are a thing, whether they exist. And there's a very active controversy about if you sell a pre-functional utility token, is that token, while it's pre-functional, fundamentally a security? In other words, are people buying that not because they want to use it, but because they have an expectation of profit, so it should be treated as a security? That's not been clarified, and unlike Switzerland, unlike Malta, unlike I think Estonia, unfortunately, I just have to say, the SEC has not come out and provided clear guidelines about what's a utility token, what's a currency token, what's a security token. And they're doing what I would refer to as regulation by enforcement. In other words, they send out subpoenas, they do phone calls, they kind of are scary, but they won't answer a question whether or not a token is or is not a security. So, what the heck do you do other than come to Malta and enjoy the nice weather and the good food and talk at conferences? Well, what the solution I'm coming up with, and I'll talk about it during the presentation, is you do private fundraising for your blockchain or crypto startup so that you have enough funds in order to develop your product, at least so that your utility token has enough functionality that you can argue that it's not a security. Then you can consider doing an ICO in the US. They're not banned in the US, you just gotta be careful about doing an ICO that can be considered a security sale. But it's complex, and that's why we're looking at other jurisdictions, situating in Malta, situating in Estonia. And my favorite expression is, the world is in a jurisdictional death match right now. And so, if they start fighting, I'll get out of the middle. But, whether it's between Singapore or any of these, it's like the Hunger Games. They're all these jurisdictions are going to this island, seeing who can put in the best regulations the fastest. And guys like me are trying to tell our clients, which one do we choose this week? So Malta obviously has some very serious legal talent who, I gotta give Malta credit. And you and Gibraltar, to a certain extent, and some other jurisdictions, there's different levels of regulation. One level of regulation is, no, you may not do this. That's sort of the Chinese model. Obviously that doesn't work if you're trying to do crypto. Then there's almost what I would call the benign neglect model, which is, well, we don't know, we're just going to apply the old laws and it's fine. It's kind of like Bahamas, I'd say, or British Virgin Islands. Then there's the US, which is, we're not going to regulate it, but we're going to scare you. And then there's places like Malta, where you're being proactive and carving out legislation that I think we're all going to admit it's not perfect. It's not perfect. It can't be perfect. It's new, right? But at least you're trying something that's positive, and once you have it in real life and you can sort of play with it and work with it, you can see what the gaps are and you can fix it. I'll take that any day over negative regulation or banning. So I gotta give Malta credit. And I think November 1st is when it comes into effect. I'm curious to see how it plays out.
Thank you so much. So we've got one country left in our jurisdictional death match. and that's Switzerland. So, Chris, if you could take us through what Switzerland has to offer in terms of regulations and regulatory climate, that'd be really helpful.
Thank you, Peter. And Gordon's absolutely right. I've been on panels here where it actually turns into a fight, where everyone's trying to argue which jurisdiction is the best, and I'm not sure the audience ever gets an answer because everyone just is yelling over each other. So maybe things have settled down a little bit, or maybe we have civil people. No? Okay. So Switzerland has positioned itself as a very friendly jurisdiction. In my opinion, they don't have any new laws, so to speak, but the regulators have issued guidance that help guided companies to navigate these issues. So they've issued guidance to help companies determine what is a security if they're issuing tokens, depending on the type of the token. They've also issued guidelines on tax treatment of ICO proceeds and how those cryptocurrencies should be taxed when they're actually held by the user or other tokens, and whether they are taxed. I guess, though, in kind of along the lines of determining which jurisdiction is the best, I talk to clients about thinking about the global situation in terms of where their company is going. As Peter mentioned, the whole idea is that these are supposed to be global concepts that are going to blanket the world, and you should think about how your company can grow within that. And so we talk about technology being scalable. Can the concept that you're trying to prove as a use case scale to be used across the world? And I think we should also think about legal preparation in terms of scalability as well. So we can pick a jurisdiction up here. We can pick Malta, Gibraltar, Estonia, Switzerland as a great place as a springboard for your company. But I also think you should think about how you can scale your company so that it's built from the onset to address the legal landscape globally. So when you're building it, think about the laws in the US. So maybe you don't have to address them right away, but think about them when you're building it. Think about how AML is dealt with worldwide, how data protection issues are dealt with worldwide, how data privacy issues are dealt with, and then you're set up for success and you can have the greatest potential.
Can I throw something in there?
Yeah, sure.
I want to pick up on what he said about Sada Bank and make sure that doesn't get lost on the audience. This is a big deal. And I found out about it on Saturday because people I know in Malta had their accounts frozen, and it was kind of a weekend ambush kind of thing. And I'm a big fan of Malta. I've come here many times. I kind of put my reputation on the line with it. It needs to get handled. There's a real challenge right now in general with banking. It's not specific to crypto or blockchain. I mean, God bless Estonia, but they just had Danske Bank, one branch, I gather, laundered $234 billion over maybe a 10-year period. That's more than the current market cap of all crypto, which is $212 billion. Think about one branch laundered all that. Then you have issues from Latvia, you have the Panama Papers, and it's not like the U.S. is so clean. So banking in general needs to clean up its act. I really want Malta to succeed. It is not. It's tough to find a bank that will do crypto in general. I mean, I think we're all kind of facing this issue right now. And yes, if other companies are coming to Malta to do business, they can't have their accounts frozen. That's real bad. So I want to request I know you're not the government, I know you're not Sada Bank, but it is a thing. So I don't want to just let it drop. I think I really would like Malta I want Malta to win and succeed. And so things like this need to be handled a little bit better.
Is there any response? So Jan, you've done a lot of work from a more practical perspective. Have you run into any of the legal issues that have popped that we've discussed on the panel, or which legal issues have you run into in your encounters with crypto and blockchain?
So far, we've been fortunate enough not to run into any. We do a pretty thorough vetting of all our clients. So apart from doing our own due diligence on the client, we also sense check the projects pretty thoroughly. Does this project have a real use case for the blockchain? Is there a real use case for it to have its own token? Why can't I pay for your service in Ether or Litecoin or whatever? We also sense check the founders. So if you come to me and you tell me that you're going to, disrupt the airline industry and you've never had any experience running airlines, then we're going to politely decline. So we've never had the kind of imploding project issues, and as part of our onboarding process, we require the client to bring us a legal opinion on the project. which gives us a certain degree of peace of mind. I think the situation is about to change from November 1st. There's quite a few ambiguities in the law, and there are quite a few things that maybe haven't been thought out from a practical point of view. For example, I don't know, Max, if Max can confirm, if a utility token gets placed on an exchange, then it becomes a virtual financial asset. However, you have decentralized exchanges where any one of your holders can fork in your token. And you have exchanges like KuCoin, Litecoin, all of them. They run polls. So which token should we add to the exchange this month? So if if you've issued your utility token, you're happily complying with the law, and some exchange decides to add you to their exchange, suddenly you find yourself in violation due to no fault of your own. You can email them and ask you to take them down, but they make their money out of trading fees. So if there's trading volume in it, they're not going to take it down. So there are a few of these use cases that we can foresee that we imagine might give us and our clients a few headaches down the line.
Perfect. Have you noticed that some jurisdictions are more or less difficult than others? And do you have a jurisdiction that you prefer?
We love Malta because it's a very practical place to do business. But in the interest of full transparency, we also have an office in Gibraltar. We also have people on the ground in Gibraltar, and we notice that, especially the larger, more serious clients, the first contact that comes through comes from their legal counsel. And it's a series of questions, it's a questionnaire. Please answer these questions, bam, 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 because they're jurisdiction shopping. They want to create a matrix and see where they're going to park this project. And I see a lot in the industry, a lot of people comparing the blockchain industry to gambling. This is gambling 2.0, it's another gambling. There's one fundamental difference, though, and I worked in gambling for 10 years before entering this space. When Malta rolled out its gambling laws, online gambling was socially and politically unpalatable. Nobody wanted these companies in their backyard. So the only place a gambling company could go in Europe was Gibraltar, the Isle of Man, and Alderney. I lived in Gibraltar for 3 years. Don't. And I've never been to the Isle of Man or Alderney, but it's even more grim, apparently. So it was very easy for Malta to, roll out a legislation and, have companies flowing in here because it's a much better destination. With blockchain, it's different. Every jurisdiction wants this business to set up shop there. So there's going to be much more competition from a jurisdictional point of view. So I think what we're going to see is more or less every single EU country rolling out some sort of regulation of its own within the next 2 years, and then we're going to see a race to the bottom being as light touch as possible. We just hope that the industry survives that interim period.
Perfect. Let me throw out a general question for the group. If you could, let me know what you think are the possible enforcement actions that governments are starting to take against blockchain businesses. And if you're starting a blockchain business, what should be on your radar for compliance? What might come in the door or in the mail with regard to a compliance action? So what should companies have on their radar?
I can give you the US nightmare scenario right now. So I don't have to imagine what's coming, it's coming. There's been at least 80 subpoenas issued by the SEC to different blockchain startups in the US. And has anyone in this room seen an SEC subpoena? I mean, not for you, but for a friend? Okay, they're a freaking nightmare. I mean, it's not just, hey, what did you do yesterday? It's page after page after page of all your business practices, everyone that's related to you, all the transactions you did, what's your model? It's almost like the SEC sent out a subpoena so that they could get the industry to teach them what the hell they were doing. Okay, these were not like just normal legal subpoenas. It's more like, please explain blockchain to us. Right? And what happens is people are responding to these subpoenas, and of course in the process of doing that, they're saying everyone that they've worked with. Now everyone that they've worked with is getting a subpoena. right? Now, this is not yet turned into civil or administrative actions, but I think that's coming. But it's had the effect. I mean, these things are not cheap to respond to. When people get scared, that's part of the reason people are coming to Malta. You know, it's kind of freaky to wake up, drink your coffee, read the paper, and get a subpoena. Right? This has happened to people. So we're getting, this is what I was referring to before, we're getting regulation by enforcement, not through clarity. And this is a real life thing that's happening right now. We're also seeing, and this one I have no problem with, we're seeing lots of fraudulent ICO projects being actively brought down by the SEC, the FBI, and various attorney generals. That should happen, I think. But somewhere in the middle zone, we're seeing some states take a more activist position than other states. So Massachusetts especially is being very aggressive. If you sell just one little token to Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Attorney General is taking action where the Wyoming Attorney General isn't. You know, and everyone over here in Malta is like, what are these places? Well, these are relatively small, unpopulated states. You know, Massachusetts is small, Wyoming is relatively unpopulated, but we're having to thread a needle between all of these. It's a challenge. So welcome to being a U.S. attorney.
Sure.
And sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, now I guess what's important to think about is what's at stake in this industry. So if you think about how Uber started, basically what they were doing is they were violating local taxi ordinances. And there's really not much at stake there. I mean, you will get in trouble, but no one's going to jail. There's no big fines necessarily in place for those. But what Uber's getting in trouble for now is data protection issues. And that's what this industry is all about. It's all about data, where it's going, and it's basically borderless. And the GDPR, I think, should be on everyone's radar. And that applies not only if you're operating in the EU, but if you're offering goods or services or retaining data of EU citizens. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world, where you're based. If you touch EU people, the GDPR will be applied, and most likely other companies are going to try and follow suit with the GDPR so they can work with the EU, and they're going to enact their own regulation. And that's where the really big fines and the really big enforcement actions come from with these new tech companies. So I think that should be on everyone's radar.
What I wanted to add is a potentially totally different viewpoint from what the US have. In Malta, our regulatory regime has created this sort of functionary gatekeeper and at the same time policing agent for ICOs. So strictly speaking, if the model created by Dr. Ganado actually works in practice, we should not have a lot of compliance visits by our regulators. We don't have a lot of enforcement actions. Why? Because we have one entity which is carrying out a dual control function, which is first of all, and it's the VFA agent, first of all acts as a gatekeeper by keeping out of the whole system the bad apples, so that a rotten apple doesn't end up with the whole system crumbling on its feet. And secondly, that VFA agent is also being entrusted with a very big responsibility to continue monitoring that particular issuer and ensure that it is compliant with all regulations, with the rules which were issued by the MFSA, and in itself it is keeping itself as a fit and proper person within the whole ecosphere of the token within which it is operating. So I think that if, and rather than if, I would say when the system starts operating after the obvious initial teething problem, I think we're not going to see a lot of enforcement action by the regulator as long as the VFA agent is doing his job. So what I think would ultimately be the biggest issue would be for the actual VFA agent, which is being itself imposed enforcement action by the regulator because it's not doing its job. So what Malta has done is, rather than allowing the bad apples to get into the system, keeping them out to this VFA agent so that there is not so much enforcement action carried out.
Max, you think that's a perspective you share, or what are your thoughts on this?
Just to be clear, the VFA Act wasn't one of my responsibilities.
Okay.
But the VFA agent is a filter, clearly. I think the areas where we're going to see enforcement relate to AML, because it's a nightmare for anyone in this industry. In other words, complying with money laundering law is going to be difficult, it's going to be tested, and Malta has gone beyond what the EU is requiring. The EU has picked on wallet providers and exchanges. We have gone on to issuers and all service providers. So we've gone way beyond what the EU is requiring. And the issue we have is that we can't foresee what kind of issues are going to pop up in the AML implementation because it's so new, as we've all been talking. So that is one big issue. There's consumer protection law. Again, EU is very hard on certain areas, just like GDPR. We have the consumer protection laws, and again, we can expect that some dealings will offend the consumer protection laws, and if not properly advised, a platform offering some service lines might find an issue there. I agree with Joseph that the likelihood is the VF agent is going to be so strict to cover its own back that it's not going to allow non-compliant groupings or processes to happen because they will feel the responsibility. In fact, the big issue here is who is going to be a VF agent. And there'll be silence in the room.
Excellent.
In my opinion, it happens in each new industry. I mean, I think that the year 2018, more 2019 and 2020 is going to be the year of regulations. I can see it from our experience with the clients. We have a bunch of clients who are opening, for example, registering exchange platforms in the same time in Estonia, in Malta, in Switzerland. So it shows that the interpreters who are running in this blockchain sector, they want to be regulated, and they're willing and they're expecting regulations. I mean, for me, the biggest issue is, and the biggest problem is the EU. That EU is not doing anything which is going to be centralized. We need a one regulation in the whole EU. It's the same as we have an EMI license, which might be passport from one country to another. It is pointless, because if we have a free market and you can offer easily services from one country to another, to the citizen of other member state, it is what I think what people are expecting are the whole European regulations, and it will be working in this time. It will work clear, because it is. You mentioned Uber case. I mean, we had those massive protests in Warsaw, in Poland last week of the taxi driver, and yeah, they're still protesting against the illegal transport providers. Actually, the mailmans, they weren't protesting against emails, I think, at least.
Thanks so much. So Jan, we've heard a lot about AML and KYC, and I think a lot of companies, from a practical perspective, focus a lot of energy on these. Chris brought up GDPR. Do you think that's on any of the clients' radar from a practical perspective, or has most of the focus been on AML, KYC, and securities law?
Well, from a practical perspective, it's quite a headache. Once you're collecting people's passports, proof of addresses, etc., you're obviously in possession of quite a large amount of sensitive information. The way we worked around it was we actually killed several birds with one stone. We outsourced our KYC and AML procedures, our protocols, to licensed UK identity providers. So we don't see any of the information. It goes straight to them, and they check it against their watch list, PEP list, etc., all their databases, and then all we receive back is an API call saying, yes, this user is cleared to participate in the ICO or not. So we have kind of sold that risk to a provider. And for €3.50, I think, per check, it's a very worthwhile deal. And this also ties in, this also works really great because we went out and we actually used providers that service most banks. So now we go to banks and we tell them every single one of our contributors would have passed your own KYC and AML checks. So, basically every single one of our contributors is whitelisted. So compliance isn't always a bad thing, or isn't always necessarily the irritant. It seems to be from a business development point of view. It can actually come with a lot of benefits.
Perfect. So we're actually running a little bit low on time. I think we only have about 5 minutes left. So I would like maybe to have each of the speakers kind of prepare a final thought on what they think is the most pressing issue, or what issue or thought they would like to leave you with. Before that, I just want to see if anyone in the audience has any questions. And I'd like to take those first. If we run out of time, I'd just like to use it up on questions. Does anyone have anything they want to ask one of the panel members?
We have a private brokerage services, Isle of Man-based company, and we want to establish like subsidiary here in Malta. My question is about the exemptions in financial virtual assets. So Malta says that if we deal only with mother companies, we don't need license for this activity. Does it work or not?
It's a bit early. The regulations, the guidelines are still in consultation period. But that is an idea that within a group, then you fall within an exemption because the transactions are internal and do not affect anyone outside. There is that idea in the consultation paper. And I think it will be adopted.
So next week?
Yes, assuming everything is going to happen on day one, which again we don't think will be the case because there is a process. The first ones who have to be licensed are the VFA agents, and then a VFA agent has to tell you you fall within the exemption, just like the VFA agent has to tell you you are a security token, or you're a virtual asset, or you're a utility. Without the VFA agent taking responsibility, nothing will work. So VFA agents come in first as the judges of where you fall. And then, then you get to the next step. So I think you have to wait about 2 months before you will start getting an indication of an answer.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
The hourly rate of all of us together is probably €10,000 an hour. So this would be the moment to ask the question because that right there, that answer was probably 10,000. Keep it coming. We work for free. Be brave.
Probably just a strange question, but I think that you are as the owners of the companies who does the consultancy, audits, whatsoever, right? Have you thought about this type of utility ICO for the company to sell upfront the consultation hours with the discount?
I'll take that one. I think if you remember my answer before, where I said one of the first things we do when we sense check clients is, does the project have a real requirement for the blockchain and does it have a real requirement for its own token? You can pay us in euros, Ether, BTC, or any of the top 10 market cap currencies. So we don't need our own token and we would fail our own sense check. So I think that's...
I mean to sell upfront tokens which will represent the hour of consultation.
Why?
I will go for utility then.
Yes. Go to the US, because it's a free functional token. Is it a voucher or is it a free functional token? I don't know.
I mean, in all fairness, what is the point of? So say for example, we're going to, for example, the common issuance is around 100 million. That's the kind of. Goldilocks spot for amount of tokens minted. So you're going to create these 1 minute of consult, €1. How are you going to evaluate this? It makes no practical sense I know there are firms that did it here, but from a technical and tokenomic point of view, it makes absolutely no sense.
And in fact, from the actual economics of it, those who try to do it, they're not living up to their expectations.
I don't come
for the same reason you're stating, is there really real use for this?
Yep, so this will probably be our last question.
How do each one of you handle two coins, one utility and one security? The security could be a stable coin, which could be backed by a value. For each jurisdiction, how will you handle a project that has two coins? They're interdependent on each other.
We're building a project that's very similar to that right now. It's an asset-backed token, which is tied to, it's a non-fungible cryptographic safekeeping receipt, which is tied to basically a quantity of gold, a bar of gold. The project is for a private US bank. And every day we take the spot price from the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. And obviously gold isn't that volatile, so every day we mint or burn stable coins 1-to-1 with the dollar that then top up someone's Visa card, the holder's Visa card. From a technical point of view, it's not something that's phenomenally difficult. We're creating quite a few of these. Some are backed by precious metals, some are backed by investment, wine, art, etc. So it's not a technically unfeasible thing. And as we start to get more and more security clients, we start noticing a need for a buy token ecosystem, where you have people that are injecting capital for a return, or injecting or placing assets under management, but then you need to have either a token that provides the functionality that is not tied to the profits or return on the original investment, or liquidity for the underlying assets.
Let me.
And the security.
Yes, it's very common right now, and I just want to see how each jurisdiction handles.
Well, I want to throw something out there, which is I would argue that in the U.S. at least, that it's difficult to say that a stable coin is a security, because inherent in the idea of a security is an expectation of profit.
Gemini, the government has two coins. One of them is Gemini, right, which is a stable coin, and the Winklevoss brothers is doing that. So since after September 11th of this year, there's a lot of subpoenas issued and a lot of enforcement by the SEC, like Token Lot, CAM, However, the only positive news from those days were two stable coins that were approved.
Again, though, in the U.S., it's hard to argue that a coin that maintains its value in a stable manner is a security, because there's no profit expectation there, and if you're not taking risk when you have it. So assuming Tether was liquid, just hypothetically, in some world where Tether was liquid and had $1 backing up every USDT, everyone understand what I'm saying? Okay, assuming there's some hypothetical world where they actually had this, so that one Tether is always worth $1. It's almost impossible to argue that Tether is a security, because it's going to stabilize at $1. You're not buying it with an expectation of profit. And to use an example from earlier today, if you tie your token to a commodity type asset like a diamond or gold or something like that, it's hard to argue that that's a security, because the underlying asset is itself a commodity and a non-security.
How about the effort of others element of the Howey test?
Well, so with the Howey test, each one of there's 3 or 4 prongs depending on how you count. Right? Some people compound. Each one of those prongs need to be true. So if you want to do Boolean algebra, it has to be all ones. If you're missing any single element, it's not a security.
Yeah, but if you're making a security coin, right? A stable coin, a lot of the SEC basically says that it could be security, right? Because a lot of them are dependent on the effort of others.
But you can, I mean, if I build a condo, it's depending on the effort of others, but that doesn't make it a security.
I understand, and I know that there's 3 other elements.
Sorry?
I said I understand and know that there are 3 other elements, but I think so far, Ethereum and Bitcoin are not considered security. They're more utility because they're more established, and everything else seems to be. So if you're doing a stable coin, isn't it better to consider that as security, or do you think that is utility coin?
I'd say whatever. It's not up to us. You can't label it a security and therefore make it a security. It has to actually pass the Howey test. If you're saying if you're trying to decide whether or not it's an investment contract, the test is the Howey test, unless you get into state law.
Yeah, I understand that, but a duck is a duck, right? And that's what the SEC has been doing, I believe.
Actually, not always. There's been cases with case law where someone's labeled something shares or stock, but it wasn't actually economically like a stock, and so they treated it not as a security. In the case of the actual original Howey case, no one called that thing an investment contract, no one called that thing stock, but they looked at the economic reality of the transaction and decided that it was in fact a security. The name that you attach to it, if it matches with the economic reality, they'll treat it like that thing. Okay, but I can't say that, I can't take my stock, my security, call it a chair, and have the SEC go, oh wait, it's not a security because it's a chair. Just like I can't do the reverse. I can't play name games with it. And there's no way around the idea that if you don't have something if you're trying to do an analysis about whether something is an investment contract, there's no way around the idea that you have to apply each prong and each one needs to be true. So it's not enough that you have efforts of others. It's not enough just that you have expectation of profit. It's not just enough that you have common enterprise. Every little part of that needs to be true for it to be an investment contract.
So Gordon, actually you're really lucky because Gordon's going to be talking later about U.S. securities law, and it gives you another opportunity to hammer it out, but we are actually over time and I'm getting the kill signal.
In that case, I'll pass on the mic.